Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday at 7 o'clock. I almost said it was Monday at 7, but it's Thursday, 7 o'clock, the 23rd of September. Normally, you'd be watching Look Around the Confederation. However, because of some scheduling things, and if you don't know what those scheduling things are, you need to go and rewatch Monday's episode of SCV Chat. We could not do our Constitution Day special on Constitution Day, so we're going to do it a week later. But it was a good reason why we had to postpone, of course, that being the funeral of Nathan Bedford Forrest and his wife, Marianne Montgomery Forrest. So we were a little bit preoccupied. We started this last year. We had Carl in the upper right-hand corner, well, at least to my right, and gentleman, Ryan. What's Ryan's last name, Carl? Sorry, Carl, couldn't hear you.
Ryan
Walters, thank you. I apologize. Been a year, forgot his name. Came on and discussed the Constitution. Kind of did a back and forth comparison between the U.S. Constitution and the Confederate Constitution. This year, we're going to continue on with our love of the Constitution, a document that was written and forged and defended by Southerners. And of course, this year we have Carl and the well-known, world-famous Kennedy twins. Before I get too much further, I do want to get through our disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are not necessarily those of the SCV, its GEC, nor any division, brigades, camps, or other subsidiaries. Anyway, how are you guys doing this fine Thursday evening? And thank y'all for being on.
Absolutely great.
Thank you for having us.
Hey,
it's an honor to be on with Carl. That's the important thing.
I hope we can hear him. I have trouble hearing sometimes.
Yeah, Connor, you got to work to get him to talk. You realize?
Oh yeah. Well, like we were discussing before, Carl's about as shy as a full brigade of cavalry at the gallop. Anyway. So I've just got a couple of questions, but before we get kicked off to open the floor for questions, there is one particular question I wanted to ask Carl, and kind of plug the National Confederate Museum while doing it. Excuse me. Since I've known you, and since the Confederate Museum has been a discussion point, and eventually voted on and now built. One of the ideas and premise behind it was a timeline of Southern history from first 1607 all the way up to modern day, and surely wouldn't the Constitution fit into that timeline? And if so, why is it important for us to put it in that timeline at the National Confederate Museum?
Well, I think Ron and Donnie would both probably agree with me on this, that if you go back to the years and the arguments and the discussions and the debates that led up to what became armed conflict in 1861, essentially what you had was a constitutional crisis. At the end of the day, it all goes back to whose interpretation of the Constitution are we going to live under? Is it going to be the original views of the Constitution as ratified by the states and as supported by the Southern states in 1860 and 1861 and through the war? Or is it going to be this new, basically a national common law that is determined and dictated as they go? In other words, let's turn the government into some arbitrary thing that is whatever we say it is at any given time. And that was the position that was supported by the North. All right. So out of that argument, out of the constitutional issues comes the vindication for secession. the vindication for almost every argument, or virtually every argument that the southern states had on their side. Are we one unitary government, or are we in fact a union of states, as the name United States applies? So I think in terms of answering your question, how important it is it's at the root of everything that our cause is defined by.
All right, good deal. So I'm going to allow this time for any opening statements, anything anybody wants to say before diving into a couple of prepared questions that I have. So y'all just figure out who wants to go first, and
I'm gonna jump right in there because a lot of people have questioned why we talk so much about, quote, politics. They say, why are you writing in the Confederate Veteran and going to all these meetings talking about constitutional issues and talking about limited government and the growth of big governments, that you're getting too political? Well, if those people would read the Constitution of the the Constitution of the Sons of Confederate Veteran, in the preamble, it says, now listen, this is what we are all dedicated to. I'm reading from the preamble of our SCV Constitution. We have an allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, and it's not just Lincoln's Constitution, but the original Constitution and a states' rights interpretation of that Constitution of limited government. So that's why. And it also tells us that we are to encourage the impartial history of the South to be taught from Jamestown, Virginia, as Carl just mentioned, to today. And then in that same preamble, it tells us that every member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans shall be a good and respectful citizen and do his full duty as a citizen accordingly. We, as members of the SCV, are citizens of this country, and we are obligated, according to our Constitution, SCV Constitution, to promote a particular kind of government, the type of government our Confederate forefathers fought for, stood for, and what we ought to be standing for today. And that's my opening statement. Thank you.
And I'm going to jump in there and say, listen, most conservatives have the idea that our rights and our liberties are protected by that wonderful document called the Constitution. Well, it is a wonderful document, but there's, as it was said early on, there's no abracadabra in the Constitution. John Randolph of Roanoke, Virginia said that. There's no magic in the word. In other words, the Constitution is not self-enforcing. Just because it's written on the document doesn't mean anything unless we have the political mechanism necessary to enforce the limitations on the federal government inscribed in the Constitution. Unless you have that, then you become a stateless people, and we become political slaves to what is now a neo-Marxist federal government. And I know a lot of people, or some people, don't like the term neo-Marxist, but I'm sorry, that's what they are. The liberals supported the postmodernists when they came over to the United States in about 1960s. They had abandoned traditional Marxism because they saw it was utter failure. They moved over to diversity and group antagonism, and the liberals supported them. The progressives supported them. The secular humanists supported them. The atheists supported them. They're all just a group of postmodernist neo-Marxists. They're not classical Marxists, but they still hate Western Christian civilization, and they're dedicated to uprooting it. As C.S. Lewis said, they are men without chest, determined to destroy those ancient values of our Christian civilization. And that's our enemy. And the Constitution is meaningless unless we have a political mechanism to enforce it. And currently we don't. That's why I say we are a stateless people. In fact, we are political slaves to the group that now control the federal government. But that too can be changed. But that's why the Constitution is important to understand it, to understand that it is a limitation upon not state rights, but a limitation on the federal government. The First Amendment says, the First Amendments of the Bill of Rights, as we call it, the first 10 amendments, Congress shall not. It didn't say the states shall not.
Come on, Carl, you got to jump in there.
Yeah, it's your turn.
I would follow that with going back to let's look at this both historically as well as philosophically, because I believe the two of them go together in this instance. George Mason in the Virginia ratifying convention, in the Philadelphia Convention, made the point that when you have a set of colonies and a populace among at that time the 13 states, who are so diverse, and his words were manners, habits, and customs. In other words, their culture. They're diverse in their traditions. And culture is also at the center of this great argument that's been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, really, you can the arguments between North and South can be traced back to the English Civil War. Instead of rebels and Yankees, it was Cavaliers and Roundheads. So this cultural distinction existed well before they ever even got to this continent. Okay, so when you flash forward to 1787, 1788, and they're trying to form a union, and Mason makes the point that a central consolidated government will never be able to cater to a monolithic group of people who are so diverse in their manners, habits, and customs. The only thing that could make that union work would be to have power remain divided amongst the states. In other words, self-government by the states with a general government. We did not set up a national government, a central government, a federal government. It was a general government created for specific purposes, in which the states delegated certain enumerated powers, reserving all others to themselves. Those were the words of Thomas Jefferson in the Kentucky Resolution. So the only way that our union can work as it stands is to allow the states to govern themselves according to the traditions and culture and worldview of their populace. When you send all power and all decision-making authority to this central consolidated Leviathan in Washington, D.C., and it can only cater to one part of the population. That's why, like what Ron says, you wind up with a group that becomes a stateless people. We have no power backing us. We have no governmental defense of our position. Why? Because our culture is being neutralized and nullified, and the reason it is because the states have abandoned their right to govern themselves and transferred all power to Washington, D.C. So to summarize all of that, in a federal system implies, or it mandates, a separation of powers between the member states of a union, allowing them to govern their own affairs, with the exception of these 17 or 18 specific delegated powers that are delegated. I learned this from the Kennedys. One of the things I remember from the South was right that I read years ago. A delegation of power does not mean that power was surrendered. It was delegated. It is on loan to that general government by the states. If you upset that arrangement, when you get to a place to where 300 million people are governed by 545 with a handful of czars and regulatory agencies that now make law even though they were delegated no authority to do so, 300 million people being governed by a small minority, which has a court set up to determine the limits of its own powers, what you have is a recipe for disaster, and that's where we're headed.
And the important thing that Carl's pointing out is that these, as originally designed, the states were to govern themselves. All political issues, all social issues, moral issues, these issues were to be handled by the states. And up until 1861, that's what happened. In my book, Be Ye Separate, I list on page 13, page 9 through 13, be ye separate. 9 times from the founding of the constitutional government until 1859, 9 times when the state nullified something the federal government was doing. And the states were allowed to do that because they had the authority to do that. Listen, the important thing is, to me, is of those 9 examples that I put out in Be Ye Separate, which is addressed to the Christian people, is 6 of those times it was northern states that nullified the federal government's actions, not southern states. It was only 3 times that the southern states in those 9 examples. So yes, we had that right. The big question is, what happened?
Can I add something to that very quickly? The most demanded by the states. Remember, the Bill of Rights was insisted on by the ratifying states, and over 200 recommendations were sent in by the states for amendments to the Constitution. And most of the states ratified the Constitution on the basis that a Bill of Rights would be forthcoming. Okay. Of those 200 some odd amendments, they were boiled down to what became the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Of those 10 amendments, they are actually listed in reverse order of importance to the states. Right. Had they been listed in order of request by the states, the 10th Amendment would have been the first, the 9th Amendment would have been a second, and the rest of them would have fallen in line in the other order. And here was the main thing I wanted to point out to add to what Ron is saying. Thomas Jefferson said the 10th Amendment, and y'all, if you haven't read it, go read it. But Thomas Jefferson regarded the 10th Amendment as the benchmark, the cornerstone of the principles on which our union was built. When the 10th Amendment is nullified, the cornerstone of the union is missing. In other words, when you take the authority away from the states, the original intent of the founding generation has been discarded. And now we are faced with an arbitrary government.
Now, I want to add one thing on a historical note that Carl said, because Carl, you mentioned George Mason talking about the cultural dissimilarity in this country. It wasn't just Southerners. John Adams, in a letter to his wife Abigail, after meeting Southerners in Philadelphia, he told her, there's no way we can keep this government together without the utmost care because of the dissimilarity between our peoples. We have always been more than just one nation, indivisible, and people who swallow that garbage need to be bored for the hollow horn. And if you don't know what that is, come hear some of my speeches.
Well, and it's important too, because Donald and I point out in Yankee Empire, which we've gotten a lot of, or some flack from, because we dare to call the United States the Yankee Empire. But we point out that there's a cultural difference, that Northerners and Southerners are so different, and this is what led to the war, as Carl pointed out. And of course, there's been, Albion Seed, which was written by a guy from Massachusetts, and then you've got Grady McWhinney, a great man, God rest his soul, cracker culture, Celtic ways of the Old South, showing the cultural dissimilarity. And as Carl said, these fights were going on in England, and they came over as the Celts, or predominantly Celts, not all, but predominantly Celts, settled in the South. The East Anglican English Puritans settled in the North, and the conflict continued. And it was not just because we like different food or we like to dance and sing and have fun, and the Puritans don't. That wasn't the difference. The difference was in our attitude towards government. Some up north wanted a strong government to enforce their will, and they almost had a missionary zeal to they had established a city on a hill, and they were going to send out missionaries throughout the world and convert the world to Yankeedom, and everyone else would be second-class Yankees, and they would be the ruling elite. Whereas in the South, we said, just leave people alone. We're going to have fun. We're going to grow our crops. We're going to do our thing. May have a little whiskey still over there, but just leave people alone was their basic idea. Even to the point, and then people say, well, yeah, but what about slavery? They try to use that as a tar brush to stain the whole movement on. But the South was the first to attempt to get rid of slavery. The South never, Jefferson Davis spoke of the high road to emancipation, of getting to the point where the slaves could be freed and be prosperous and part of the society. The Yankees didn't do that. What did they do with their slaves, Donald?
I think they sold them down the river, down south. Hey, they kept the money in their pockets, too, in the process.
I want to go back to the fact that the Constitution is not self-enforcing because, and I hope I don't upset Carl because I know he doesn't like guns and all, but
he does, Ron. He likes the wrong caliber. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, there's so many people out there who think that, well, just you SCV people or you Southern Heritage people are the only ones that are really concerned about, states' rights and local self-government and limited federal power. But I have a book coming out this fall, Nullifying Gun Control. And in that, I point out that, look, the Second Amendment, and Carl, I hope that doesn't upset you, but that picture there. But
hey, Rodney, the only thing that upsets him is a revolver, not an automatic. That's the only thing that's got him upset.
No. I'm a revolver guy.
Yeah, I've never had a revolver jam on me, but anyway, the point is that people who love the Second Amendment, they're in the same boat that we're in. The Second Amendment is not self-enforcing. There's no abracadabra there. When they get to the point that they're ready to take our guns away from us, they will. And don't think they're going to come knocking on your door and say, give me your gun so you can have a gunfight with them. They're going to say, are you on Social Security? Then you can't have a gun. You must sign this form that you don't have a gun in your house. Now, if you lie on that form, you become a felon. Well, Carl, what happens to felons as far as the right to keep and bear arms? So the federal government that I just won't take my social. Well, you've got veterans benefits, you've got home mortgages. They can go down the list. There's ways that they can disarm us if they want to. And that, again, is why I keep harping on the fact that unless we have a political mechanism to undo what's being done to us, there's no abracadabra in the Constitution. Even the vaunted Second Amendment will be trampled on, just like the 9th and 10th Amendment, just like the First Amendment. Who would have thought that the federal government could have closed down churches and could have prohibited people from meeting and gathering? Well, all they got to do is declare a crisis, and they can do anything they want to do. That's because we no longer have the original Constitution.
And to kind of piggyback off that, I'm going to go back to culture again. Okay, so guns in the South are part of the sort of backcountry spirit of self-determination and self-reliance that our culture is spawned from. Okay. In other states, that may not be the case. in California or Massachusetts or wherever, you may have a culture there that says, no, we're going to rely solely on our police departments to protect us. We don't believe in the right to self-defense, or we don't believe in the right to defend ourselves because people can't be trusted with guns. Okay, in a society or in a union where power is separated between the states and the general government, in other words, a system of federalism, that is not a problem. Because I don't care what they do in Massachusetts. Right. I don't live there. I live in Alabama. And so my gun rights, or my free speech rights, or rights to religious freedom, should be confined to my state, which is reflective of the culture that I live in. If you want to dictate what churches can say, and you want to ban guns in Massachusetts, that's fine. That's your call. Okay, that is called self-government. In Alabama, I know what's going to happen when gun rights are instituted back to originalism. We're going to remain one of the most armed societies in the country, and well, we should. Okay, because that's our culture. When the problem comes in is when you try to homogenize all of these cultures and go out and perpetuate this lie that we're all one society, we're all one culture, and we've got to abide by this set of rules across 300 million people and 50 states. That's not even possible, because we are culturally dissimilar from one another, and we're not going to agree on what those rules should be. So what you wind up with is one culture dominating the entire country, and as Ron says, the rest of us becoming stateless people. That is exactly what the Confederate soldier went to war in 1861 to prevent. Yeah. Cut and dry.
Right. And what we have now is not a government of consent, but a government of coercion. And that began in 1861. And you see it today in the Biden administration and even the Republican administration. I wonder why. So we still have now, there's been a real earth-changing mood in the country post-Appomattox. We don't live in a government by the consent. We live by coercion. So therefore, Washington, D.C., they don't care what the Constitution says. It's merely what do I desire. Hey, that sounds a lot like Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party in 1860.
Now, really quick, one thing to remember is that Southerners, especially Southerners, the Constitution that we live under today was put in, forced down our throats, figuratively, at the point of a bloody bayonet. So it is, in fact, the Constitution that we're living under today is a bayonet Constitution. Now, that sounds like a Southern term. Donald, is that a Southern term, bayonet Constitution?
No. The citizens of the Republic of Hawaii said that when the Yankees invaded Hawaii and threw out the royal family and the parliament in Hawaii, and they said they were given a new constitution, which they referred to as a bayonet constitution. The consent of the governed be damned.
All right, really quickly, because we did have somebody, Michael Hammond, send in a question. He missed the part about the order of the amendments and importance. Can y'all recover that really quickly?
Yeah, I think I was the one that said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were over 200 amendments that were sent in, or recommended amendments to the Constitution that were sent in by the states after the states had ratified. In other words, ratification meaning given its authority. The Constitution coming out of the Philadelphia Convention was not bound. It was not. It was a proposal. That's all it was.
Exactly. That's right.
It got its authority from the states. If we look at Article 7, it tells you that it required 9 of 13 states to ratify and to put it into force. All right, they ratified on the basis, on the agreement that a Bill of Rights would be forthcoming. So after ratification, the various states began sending in recommendations of what these amendments should be. That, like as I said, there were over 200 of them. James Madison, who was opposed to a Bill of Rights. He didn't want one. Okay, he was against it. He called it a parchment barrier. James Wilson, in his famous State House Yard speech, back in Pennsylvania, he went back and said a Bill of Rights would be redundant because where no authority is delegated, none exists. So why accentuate a negative, essentially, and try to, come in and ban something that they can't do in the first place? He actually concluded that the Bill of Rights would be dangerous because it would imply that if you can't do this one thing that we named, well, apparently we can do this other thing we didn't name. Okay, so they were arguing against the Bill of Rights. Madison called it a parchment barrier, if I remember correctly. All right, but nonetheless, they relented. They realized this Constitution is not going to be ratified unless we go along with this. Madison was still reluctant, but however, he was charged with organizing the amendments that came out of the 200 plus suggestions sent in by the states. He boiled it down to 10 amendments. You can use your own judgment as to why he did what he did. I personally think because he was opposed to the Constitution. And let me back up. There's another key important fact in here, and that is that throughout the convention, not only at first Madison started out opposing the Bill of Rights in general. When he saw he was going to lose, he started trying to promote the idea that key elements of the Bill of Rights should be enforceable against the states. He advocated for a federal negative, which means a veto power over state law. The central government, the general government, was going to be able to veto anything the states did that they didn't like. Okay, so he tried to have that inflicted, and as well as applying the Bill of Rights against the states. This was shot down unanimously. It did not pass. Okay, so Madison, I think, I'm looking for a better term than butthurt, but I think maybe butthurt was applicable. And so because he wanted this power taken away from the states, he put the 10th Amendment, which was by far the most requested, at the very bottom. I think it was kind of Madison's jab against what he did not get out of the Philadelphia Convention.
Now, could I mention one thing here? Because you're absolutely correct. In my study, the 10th Amendment was the most common thing that was mentioned, number one. Interestingly enough, Massachusetts was probably one of the loudest states proclaiming the necessity of the 10th Amendment, and New England went along with it. It's amazing how they just flipped around about 75 years later. But Massachusetts and New England were number one in pushing the concept of state sovereignty and, of course, the 10th Amendment. So
because at that time they did not have the political power of Virginia and some of the other states.
Right.
When they gained that power, all of a sudden, oh no, states' rights has got to go.
Yeah.
You see my point.
Depends on whose ox is being gored.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, and don't forget, even the High Federalist Hamilton in Federalist 31 noted that the Constitution provides for the, quote, complete sovereignty of the states. So even High Federalists had to admit that the states were sovereign. That was so obvious. It's almost like, admitting the obvious, that the sun's going to rise in the east and set in the west. You can take what they say, judicial notice of this. This is a fact that can't be argued. It was very plain. But the states wanted to make sure that this fact was there. And the 9th Amendment, I think, is also equally as important as the 10th, because the 9th Amendment said, look, just because we didn't enumerate a certain right in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Take, for example, the right of the state to determine when life begins. Now, if someone had told the delegates at the Constitutional Convention that one day Roe versus Wade would be the law of the land, well, they probably would have given up right then and gone home. So that this isn't going to happen. So their rights, there are just a whole plethora of rights that exist, and they all belong to the state. Donald, I believe the 11th Amendment was a very important amendment, which really validated the fact that the states were indeed sovereign.
Right. Most people have no idea of what the 11th Amendment is even about, but it started out with Chisholm versus Georgia in, I think it's 1793, along that area, in which some citizens of South Carolina, at the behest of Great Britain, sued Georgia. Well, Georgia was compelled to come into the Supreme Court to defend itself. Georgia was so enraged that a sovereign state would be compelled against its will to go into a federal court that they nullified the act of the federal Supreme Court, and they even stated that any federal agent that came into Georgia with the intent of enforcing this unconstitutional act shall be, quote, hung by the neck until dead without benefit of clergy, end quote. I mean, just think if we could do that with the IRS agents that run over the country. But the point is, Georgia didn't stop there. Georgia nullified that, and then she turned to her sister states. There were 14 states. Vermont had just entered the Union, and they said, look, this is a problem. And guess what? It was a representative from Massachusetts that first got on the floor of the House and raised hell because the federal Supreme Court was treating a sovereign state as if it wasn't sovereign. And he said states are sovereign and we've got to do something about it. And he introduced the bill that later became the 11th Amendment. Again, we're pointing back to the fact even New England, even Massachusetts, they all recognize states as sovereign. Now, listen, when Lincoln went into office, what did Lincoln say? He said that no states were sovereign, the federal government was sovereign, and that probably nowhere is it even mentioned that states are sovereign. Lincoln was a fool. He was an idiot. He was constitutionally crazy, or he had demonic ideas of what he wanted to inject into this nation.
Lincoln became
You can tell I don't like Lincoln.
Lincoln became the founding father of the current supreme federal government. Lincoln and the Republican Party, the founding fathers of the original constitutional republic of sovereign states, we all know who they are, but people don't recognize that those men were pushed aside, and Lincoln and the Republican Party became the founding fathers of the supreme federal government.
Yeah, it wasn't only New England. It was other northern states like New York.
Yeah.
I mean, that were, today when you use the term states' rights, it's become a pejorative in the circles of the uneducated. They're going to say, oh, what you mean is the state's right to own slaves. That's what you mean. It's all, they very dumbly take it back to slavery. But the New York delegation in the Philadelphia Convention got up and walked out. Some of the strongest states' rights advocates were Robert Yates and George Clinton and John Lansing. Lansing stood up in the middle from New York, stood up in the middle of the Philadelphia Convention and said, had it been appertained by my state that this proposed government, or this government is going to be proposed to dissolve or diminish the rights of the states, no delegates from my state would have been sent here. States' rights must never be undone. This is the New York delegation saying this. So this idea that states' rights is some sort of a buzzword for slavery, that's the height of ignorance. You don't know what you're talking about. You need to go back and read real history and get out of your comic book education.
Well, I see Adam put up secession was first proposed by New York or New England, but let's see, New England. Donald, I believe the first guy that wrote a textbook on the Constitution that was used at West Point was a textbook called A View of the Constitution by William Rawle, and you and I edited and annotated it and published a hardback copy of it recently. But he, in what was it, chapter 31?
Chapter 31 in his first.
Actually set out the mechanism by which a state could secede from the Union. And this was taught at the Military Academy of West Point This there was no question about whether or not states were sovereign, that states could, of course, go enter into the union, or they could back out from the union. That was what a sovereign entity does. And that's why it's so important that we understand, like Carl says, get away from the comic book. Really, I don't think it's even as good as comic book. It's propaganda. It's Yankee propaganda set to justify an illegal, illegitimate, and criminal invasion and occupation of the Confederate States of America, a sovereign nation, and the oppression of the people of the South. That's why it's so important to know the true history of the Constitution.
Hold
on, pause. We've been at it for 40 minutes.
You're kidding. You're here about 10 minutes.
40 minutes and 42 seconds. I know we're having fun. We need to take a small little commercial break that y'all are sponsoring. Or helping.
And I'll say one thing because I don't want to lose what Ron said.
Sponsor. We have two sponsors on the show. Victory Flags.
To follow up on what Ron was talking about.
I'll be first.
To follow up on what Ron was talking about secession being taught at West Point, a Union officer by the name of Charles Francis Adams from Massachusetts, who was the grandson of John Quincy and the great-grandson of John Adams, remarked after the war in a defense of Robert E. Lee that anterior to 1847, the secession was taught at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point as a right, as being constitutional, and he said it would be an absurdity to hold Robert E. Lee accountable for adherence to a doctrine that his own government had taught him. This is a Union officer, the grandson of two presidents from Massachusetts, saying this.
All right. Now, we have two sponsors here on SCV Chat, guys who help keep the lights on and the things going for us. The first one is Victory Flags and More. Ray Shores and his staff at Victory Flags and More in Florida, Mississippi are doing a fantastic job supplying people all over the South with flagpoles, flags, anything else. I believe you can even get some of the Kennedy twins books there. That's where I got my third edition of The South is Right. You can visit their website at victoryflagsandmore.com. Hopefully soon we'll have a new SCV Chat specific t-shirt up there. Ray was working on to where you can order our logo on any of the shirts he has in stock, and we'll get a percentage of that. That helps us pay for StreamYard so we can broadcast here on Facebook as well as on YouTube because we're doing a simulcast right now. It also helps us when we travel to events and things like that. Our other sponsor is the Make Dixie Great Again Southern Victory Campaign. Go to makedixieGreatAgain.org to learn more about it. I'm actually going to let the gentleman who came up with that idea talk about it for a second because I believe the Constitution is actually our current attack ad series right now.
That's correct. Unfortunately, when all of our stuff going through the Confederate Legion, Make Dixie Great Again, it goes through our constant contact and everything that's held and housed in Mandeville, Louisiana. Well, Ron just got out of the dark age, so we're behind the 8 ball here. We're a little bit behind, but you should be getting constant contact information about our September-October push. The Constitution as a Southern document. We have radio ads, we have videos, we have written materials. We're asking SCV camps to download these things, to sponsor these things, to spread the information around. We've got form letters that you can download and send to different media outlets as well as civic leaders and civic groups, people of influence in your community. Let them know that the SCV is supporting this. We'll get our name out, the SCV's name out, and will also influence the political establishment in your local community. So let's give it a look for your constant contact. I got mine today. Ron has been busy sending them out since he got his internet back. As y'all know, they had Hurricane Ida. He just this past week or so got his electricity, just got his internet back. So we are behind time on this. I'm sorry, but it was due to the hurricane.
All right.
And Donald, I want to remind everybody that we use the Kennedy Twins webpage for you to go to get these documents, not because we're trying to promote the Kennedy Twins webpage, but because it's the quickest way we can upload these documents.
Right.
If we send it to Ray, he's got so much going on, and we don't have a paid webmaster. We have a good friend who is our free webmaster on Kennedy Twins, so we can get turnaround in probably about 24 hours when we post stuff like that. That's the only reason we do it. And I know there's some naysayers out there that think that we're making millions of dollars selling books from our website. That alone shows how stupid they are. They've never tried to promote anything if they think that that's the case. But nonetheless, I wanted to explain why you have to go to the Kennedy Twins website instead of Make Dixie Great Again.
Or SCV.org.
Once we get the Confederate Legion up to 2,000 to 3,000 members, then we can afford to hire a part-time webmaster that can instantaneously put these things up for us.
All right, Mr. Producer, Moose, roll that clip. I got to get some ice. Moose.
I got into the SCV after receiving an award back when I was in high school. I had no clue what the SCV was. All I knew was that it was a rebel flag and it was supposed to be racist. I decided I would go and look further into it. Everything that we're taught from a very young age is that the Confederacy was wrong. They were treasonous. But it turns out it wasn't just because the South had slaves. This was because of a very fundamental principle of big government. There's nothing more American than keeping the government in line. It's what we were bred to do. It comes down from 1776, Declaration of Independence. It's because we decided to keep a government that we deemed tyrannical in line. That's what the true definition of the cause is. Me being a young Black American and being a part of the Sons of Confederate Veterans is a shock to a lot of people. The Black Confederate soldier would have had to have been one of the hardest working soldiers there was. These are men who decided to take up a cause because in the end, it was their own cause. In fact, most owners wanted the slaves to stay back because that was how they were steadily making income. They made a choice to do something that was bigger than themselves. And that's why, as a Black Confederate now, it is my duty that I owe them to do something greater than myself. Confederate history is American history, and you cannot separate the two. I am Sammy Travis, descendant of Private Benjamin Rowe, a Confederate veteran.
And we're back. So, anyway, as we were discussing constitutionality of a lot of things, had some very interesting messages come up a second ago. But really one little bit of housekeeping thing. You know, we put a message out there about keeping the comments somewhat on topic. That's mainly, just our normal housekeeping thing. Just, we're trying to, get people to comment in, ask questions so that, we can continue on with the topic on. That's all it is. Try to keep them somewhat to the Constitution if you can. Any other questions, or comments about, car tags and things, we'll do a special episode about car tags later on. We're trying to, focus on the Constitution here. Now I'm going to poke Carl for a second. mainly because I know how much he loves the next guy I'm going to mention. Actually, I'm going to save that question for a little bit later on. I'm going to open this question up for everyone. This is kind of it's about Woodrow Wilson, so it'll be about. I'll do it later. But this question is for everyone, and it's kind of the devil advocate question, really quickly. Doesn't the more complex nature of modern society require a far more extensive control by the general government?
No.
Under what logic would that apply? Why?
I'm just throwing out the devil's advocate question right now.
You had in the 19th century, the 18th century, at that time, essentially 4 folkways that predominated America. There were others coming in. You had the Germans, the Welsh. The South had probably the largest Jewish population in the Western, the Western Hemisphere, and probably maybe one of the largest in the world. You had the French Huguenots. You had Germans that were coming in. The distinction, one of the interesting things was, and James Webb makes this point in his book, Born Fighting, is that in Southern culture, these other cultures, and the Acadians, I can't leave them out.
Thank you very much.
But they assimilated into the Southern culture. As Donnie alluded to earlier, Southern culture is predominantly Scots-Irish, and with a mixture of Cavalier, the Virginia Cavaliers out of Southern and Western England in there. These other cultures assimilated into it, but at that time, in the days of the Constitution being ratified, by and large, you had roughly 4 British folkways. Okay, compare that with the amount of different cultures that you have across the country today. I can make the point that northern Alabama culture is different in some regards than Southern Alabama culture. Not enough to be an issue, but there is a distinction there, and even sometimes from county to county. So, to the contrary of the question that you asked, no, separation of powers and federalism and local control is even more important today than it was 200 and some odd years ago.
It's very important to make the point when someone asks that type of question, is that in a large country, diverse as we are, one size doesn't fit all. Amen. And when you try to force that one size on everyone, there's going to be a lot of pinching and pushing and tugging. There's going to be a lot of conflict when you try to force it. Whereas when you spread out and you have local self-government, then you can harmonize this. As you think North Alabama and Lower Alabama is different. You ought to go up there where Donald lives in redneck Louisiana, and down where I live in Cajun Louisiana. I mean, but the two aren't in conflict because we harmonize well together. But if you have one size fits all government, then everyone must follow the same template, and it will not work. It will eventually end up being a bayonet rule. You've got to force people to follow the rule that the ruling elite and the deep state decide, the neo-Marxists and the deep state decide this is what America is. This is what we are. And you deplorables, you irredeemables, you bitter clingers, y'all have got to get in line with us. And they'll put us in line via the bayonet. And that's no. One large government, no, it most certainly is not. And before you get off, Connor, I want to talk a little bit about the supremacy clause, because that's always thrown out when we talk about that.
Hey, Ron, I know we're identical twins because I've got that written down right here, and I was going to interrupt you and say that because I wanted you to poke Carl, because Carl is a strong believer. He's been defending some crazy history professor who believes in the supremacy clause. I've been reading about it, Carl.
Well, you know, I believe in I believe in the supremacy clause. John C. Calhoun believed in the supremacy clause. You know, he said that it's the strongest advocate of states' rights, because the supremacy clause, the action part, is laws passed pursuant to the Constitution shall be. The action words, you know, it shall be the law of the land, the supreme.
Do you understand that now, Carl?
But you can't have a law being the supreme law of the land if it is not first passed pursuant to the Constitution. And then you devolve into the problem that Carl pointed out earlier. Who decides? Oh, we're going to let the federal government decide if it is following the rules that the states made up to keep it in line. You know, that'd be like, you know, LSU playing Alabama and expecting to win when Alabama hires and pays for the referees. That's probably why they can win.
Yeah,
No,
I like the way Walter Williams said, if you believe in a living, breathing Constitution, I would like to invite you to my house for a game of poker with rules that are living and breathing.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
And look, Ron's nailing it. Pursuant to the Constitution. Go back to, again, I always like to go back to what did they say? It don't matter what I think. What did the framers and ratifiers of the Constitution say? Alexander Hamilton, not exactly a friend to federalism.
That's
or a friend but up until ratification, he argued a states' rights position. He came back post-ratification and tried to unsay everything he'd say, or had said up to that point, because he was being deceitful. But in the process of selling the Constitution to his state of New York, which, remember, as I said earlier, was a strong states' rights state. New York ratified the Constitution by a margin of 3 votes. And the biggest argument was, are we giving this federal or central government too much authority over us? 3 votes, because they were fearful of losing their rights to states. As a state, I mean. And Hamilton told them in the New York Convention that the supremacy clause it pertains to a specific sphere of authority. He used that word. Madison used the word, the same word, sphere of authority, also elsewhere in the Federalist Papers. I don't remember exactly. But Hamilton said, essentially, when the general government makes a law that is pursuant to the Constitution, it is supreme because power has been delegated to the government for that purpose. When it makes a law outside of those delegated powers, it is not supreme, and in fact, it is not even law. This goes back to nullification, as Ron and Donnie brought up earlier. If it's not law, if it's not in adherence to the delegated powers in the Constitution, the states are under no binding to abide by it.
Absolutely. Hamilton in Federalist 33, Hamilton, Carl is right on point, because he says acts of the federal government not pursuant to the Constitution are acts of usurpation and deserves to be treated as such. And then later on in what was it? It was 78, a Federalist 78, Hamilton said that no legislative act, therefore contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. So, you know, it's even the high Federalists, and Carl, you're right. I think he was being entirely disingenuous. He was trying to get a government going, because Jefferson pointed out that Hamilton was a monarchist, really. He wanted a strong central government. If you want a good story on Hamilton, who was it, Donald, that wrote Hamilton's Curse? It was
DiLorenzo, I believe.
DiLorenzo.
Thomas DiLorenzo, and I'd also recommend Brian McClanahan's book, How Alexander Hamilton Screwed Up America.
Right. That's a newer book. Yes. Those two, if you want to understand how Hamilton said one thing. Of course, he went to the Constitutional Convention as a dedicated monarchist. He wanted a president for life. He wanted the Senate to be like the House of Lords. He essentially wanted to replicate King George in the United States and Parliament and that system that had been corrupted from the original English Constitution. But he changed when he realized he couldn't get that. So he said, let's take the federal government that we can get. And then once he got into power, into a situation where he could influence, he did some horrible things, not the least of which was setting up the Bank of the United States and setting us on a bad road.
Interestingly, Luther Martin of Maryland, which at that time at least was still culturally a Southern state, there's been some changes there now. We still love Maryland. We got some SCV members in Maryland, but Luther Martin of that state, he went back to his state convention and told them this was going to happen. He said the monarchists and the nationalists in the Philadelphia Convention teamed up to squeeze out whatever they could get, and they intend to come back and essentially redefine everything at a later date. Patrick Henry said the same thing in the Virginia Convention when he referred to necessary and proper and the general welfare clauses as the sweeping clauses, the clauses they can mix and mold into whatever meaning they want. Mm-hmm. And guess what? You're talking about prophetic men here, because to this day, the general government does whatever it wants based on a misreading of a clearly misread interpretation of the supremacy clause by expanding the definition of necessary and proper, general welfare, and commerce, and by a completely bogus made-up doctrine known as incorporation, wherein by force through the courts, a non-legislative body has now applied the Bill of Rights against the states. And from this, you have Roe v. Wade, as was mentioned earlier. You have forced busing in the 1960s. You have all manner of other usurpations that have been taken in by the general government. It's a complete rewrite through the courts and through usurpation of the original intent of the Constitution. And I must add in there, as I know Ron and Donnie are going to agree with, I would say that Hamilton got the ball rolling, but Lincoln came about and kicked the ball down the curve about 200 yards through military force. Absolutely. And violence and bloodshed. Lincoln was the linchpin of how we got to where we are today. You cannot understand the modern political climate without understanding the destruction done to the Constitution by Abraham Lincoln.
And the Republican Party.
This goes to the question that Alan Walker has stated here, that is it true that the constitutional rights were stripped from Confederate soldiers after the Second War of Independence? Absolutely. The answer is yes, but it's also their descendants. Our rights have been stripped. We do not live under the Constitution of the Founding Fathers. We live under the Constitution of Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party. It is a constitution where they can do what they want. We as states, living in states, we live in provinces that exercise the rights that the federal government will allow us. Whereas before Lincoln, we had real states' rights. And until we can flip this thing on its head, get it right side up again, we will continue to live in a nation where we don't have rights. We have privileges that can be canceled by the federal empire at their will. If you don't believe me, look what happened to church attendance during the so-called COVID epidemic.
And Ron, Donnie, look back at what Jefferson said, because most of this is attained through the court system. And remember what Jefferson said. If the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of the limits of the general government's power, then the Constitution becomes a thing of wax that they can mold into any form they desire. When you take the states out of the equation, you no longer have the union of our founders.
Well, Ron, how can we return to a situation where we can now control the federal government? We can't do it by reading the 10th Amendment.
No, you can't, and you can't do it by standing on a street corner citing the Constitution. Again, the Constitution is not self-enforcing. You must have a political mechanism. You must have some means by which we, the people, and not just Southerners, and that's the thing, man. This is we have the potential for a red state, red county revolution. People, I think in Oregon recently, the counties of Oregon voted to secede from the idiots in Portland. And they want their own state, or else go over with Idaho. There's any number of places where we have people who are in red states, red counties all across America. It's not just the South, and it's not just Southern heritage. It's Christians, it's Second Amendment gun rights people. It's people who are tired of having the federal government dictate to them. The state of California voted in 2008 the definition of marriage: one man, one woman. The federal government nullified it. The state of Alabama wanted to put the 10 commandments in their state courthouse. The federal government nullified it, said, no, you can't. The state of Arizona during the Obama administration wanted to protect its borders, which we have a constitutional right to. A state can even go to war in defense of itself while waiting for the federal government to come to its assistance. That's in the Constitution. But what good does that do? Words mean nothing without the political mechanism to enforce it. Oh, jeepers! Did I scare everybody off there?
No.
Well, I would piggyback on Ron again. Ron gives me a lot of thoughts. He stirs up a lot of thoughts as he's talking. And one of the ideas I've had, or I've heard, I should say, it wasn't my idea. I heard it from another individual, a professor that y'all would know, and I like the idea. I like a lot of things this guy comes up with, but is one of the problems one of the weaknesses in the Constitution is in the 10th Amendment itself. The problem with the 10th Amendment is that it's a statement. That's all it is. Like Ron said, you stand out on the street corner and quote the Constitution all you want to, but it doesn't enforce itself. And the 10th Amendment falls into that category because at the end of the day, it is actually a statement. It has no teeth in it. The veto power of the presidency has teeth. If he vetoes a law, it's dead unless Congress can muster the votes to overcome that veto. That's absolute until they, undo it. The 10th Amendment, on the other hand, has no teeth. What if the 10th Amendment, on the other hand, had said that the power is not delegated to the United States nor by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states or reserved to the states respectively or the people? I'm going off the top of my head as to what that amendment says. But what if an addendum had been added saying, and if 2/3 of a state legislature nullify any federal action, the law becomes null and void in that state. Right. Now you have an enforcement mechanism.
Exactly. Okay?
So that's one of the flaws in the Constitution. And if you could add something like that in, perhaps we would have more authority to govern our own affairs.
Good.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. Matter of fact, somebody needs to write up, Donald, a sovereign state amendment and propose that to the states and set up a political mechanism by which provisional governments in every state and every red county can promote the adoption of the amendment that acknowledges, it doesn't grant, it acknowledges the right of nullification and secession by the state. Then you have teeth in the Constitution and it would also serve as a lot of people say, oh, you people just want to tear up America. Y'all want to tear up America. My granddaddy fought for that flag and y'all just want to disgrace it. No, we want to protect the rights that those people fought for, what that flag originally represented, not what Lincoln made it to represent. But we can take This amendment, the Sovereign State Amendment, which you'll find in Be Ye Separate, you'll find it in Red County Secession, you'll find it in
Why Not Freedom?
Why Not Freedom? You'll find it in
Reclaiming Liberty.
So
you can go on and on.
It's there, but if we do that, then if you pass that amendment, or even if you threaten to pass that amendment, it looks like state after state is pushing for that amendment. Then you'll get fear from the neo-Marxists that they're going to lose everything if they keep cramming this down our throat. You don't have to have secession in order to win. Quebec won its right to maintain its cultural heritage, its language, and its laws, even though it failed on 2 or 3 different attempts to secede. But just the threat alone forced the federal government of Canada to surrender or compromise to the people of Quebec. The same thing happened in Scotland. When Scotland recently voted for secession, they didn't win. And in order to prevent secession, the London government had to make all manner of concessions. So just the threat of secession can be used to enforce the limitations written into the Constitution. You've got to have a mechanism to enforce the Constitution.
Well, and you know, again, to add on to that, I mean, when people oppose secession, when they oppose these things that we're talking about, what you're opposing, what you're saying is that you oppose, or they oppose, the right to you and I having self-government. John Taylor of Caroline, who was I know y'all know who he is, but the viewers may not, and I recommend you look him up and read everything he wrote. He was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson. And he made the point, and I don't remember which book it was in, maybe New Views of the Constitution, I believe. He wrote in the early 1800s. But he made the point, he said, if the Constitution is not commensurate with the Declaration of Independence, then we have lost our Magna Carta.
Right.
And
right.
What was the Declaration of Independence? It was a secession document. So when you come on and say that you don't have a right to secede, or you don't have a right to nullify federal overreach, what you're saying is, I do not, in fact, believe in the right to self-government. I believe that your government should be dictated to you by other people. Yep. Does that what relationship does that have with the American philosophy? It's contrary to it.
In the Confederate Legion, we do in June and July the secession, 4th of July, America's secession holiday. And that is one of the points that we're trying to get people to understand. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it clearly states, number one, the only legitimate government is a government that exists by the consent, not the coercion, but the consent of the government. And number two, we, the people, have an inalienable right to alter or abolish in any government that we don't like. We don't have to have the central government's permission. If we don't like it, we can kick the bums out. The bums in Washington, D.C. right now understand they cannot be kicked out, and that's our problem today. This is discussion we're having is not an esoteric history lesson. This involves us today. It impacts you, your children, and your children's children. Okay, Connor, I'm quiet now.
Well, I've been waiting to get a word in edgewise. That's why I'm loving this episode. I'm actually typing a message to everybody, making sure that they are sharing this video. And I know we normally end it here, but we're not tonight. We're going to keep on going. I'm going to kick up a hornet's nest with this question really quickly. Just on going back on Lincoln, a lot of scholars call him the first modern president. So to speak, he created the modern presidency with the fact that, I don't know, ruling by executive order and things of that nature. But one president who followed in his footsteps, who ironically was a Southerner, was Woodrow Wilson. And this is this question. Was Woodrow Wilson in error when he began getting the United States involved in, essentially reversing the Monroe Doctrine and getting us involved in a global scale. Go.
Absolutely, he was. What he was doing there, and Ron and Donnie and I talked about this the other night, I think, briefly. And one of the two of them alluded to the shining city on a hill.
Yep.
That's not an American doctrine. That's a Yankee doctrine. That means we need to make our society over into this Yankee image in order to attract God's favor. That was a Puritan belief, is where it came from. I think it goes back, if I remember correctly, to Cotton Mather. Okay.
Yep.
As Yankee power grew, and understand, I want to clarify something. Yankee and Northerner do not mean the same thing. I want to put this disclaimer out there. Our mutual friend Clyde Wilson said it best years ago. There is no such thing as the Deep South. We hear this term, the Deep South. There's not a Deep South. There's a Deep North. Everybody else is just an American. Okay. So Yankee does not mean Northerner, but the Yankee was not a geographical term. It's not a geographical person. It is a cultural term. So the Yankee view was, once they had grown power, and I'm getting to your question, okay, just bear with me. But
I'm bearing.
They were to take the shining city on the hill outside of New England and spread it forcefully throughout the entire country. That was the after effects of Lincoln's War. The Horace Mann view of public education was forced upon the South so that we could learn the Yankee view of American history. As America grew in power, by the mass centralization of all of this authority, and by essentially dissolving the authority of the states, then America grew in power. And by World War I, we now embarked on the Yankee view of making the shining city on the hill globalist. We're going to spread our authority around the world. It's entirely contrary. Remember what Patrick Henry said in the Virginia Convention. You are not to ask how your trade may be increased or how you may become a great and mighty nation, but liberty ought to be the direct end of your government. The Wilson doctrine fed off the Lincoln doctrine, and it was a direct repudiation of the very philosophies and principles which the American Union was founded upon.
And in that case, I'm going to say that Wilson absolutely 100% followed the Constitution. He followed the Constitution as given to us by Lincoln and the Republican Party, because the real Constitution of the Founding Fathers were dead on arrival at Appomattox. I'm sorry, folks, if that upsets you, but we do not live in the nation of Washington, Patrick Henry, or even John Adams and Samuel Adams. We live in the nation of Sherman, Lincoln, Grant, and a whole plethora of neo-Marxist and Marxist criminals.
Yeah, and it's Donald and I point out in Yankee Empire just what aggressive abroad, despotic at home, just what Carl was talking about. The nation became an empire after Appomattox, and it was all set in motion. And we explained that, go over nation after nation, that the Yankee Empire treated just like they treated the Confederate nation during the war. They increased their empire. They increased their political control, and they used bloody bayonets to do it when they had to. They used intimidation when they had to. They used secretly killing off people that they didn't like. And this is the history of the Yankee Empire. This is not the America of Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson. This is not the America of Jefferson Davis. This is not the America of our Confederate forefathers. This is the America of Lincoln and the post-war Republican Party that put in place this Yankee Empire that has made itself into a worldwide power, and that power enriches, as Carl said, the globalists. It's strange. General and later President Eisenhower called them on the carpet. The military-industrial complex. Originally in his speech, by the way, he said military-industrial congressional complex. Speech writers thought, well, we might upset our friends in Congress, so let's just drop that. But that's the whole idea, and that's the sum total of the Yankee Empire. That's why we have no-win wars, continual wars. Who wins these wars? I'll tell you who wins: the globalists, the military-industrial complex. Who loses it? I'll tell you who loses it. It's people like us, who our sons and daughters are slaughtered over there for the military-industrial complex and woke generals in the Pentagon.
And the vast majority of them are from the South.
Can I back up on that and simplify this? Our global, this global idea of America as a world policeman, which Wilson essentially put into place to take it back to the Yankee relationship to this doctrine. Essentially, what it is the Salem witch trials gone worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the Salem witch trials were? It was not the burning and the banishment of actual witches. It was anybody who did not comply with the doctrine of the local community. In other words, the collective view of how your family and how your views should come together. They had and you read this in Albion Seed, it's a great book. I tell everybody, start there. Start with that book, okay? And then branch into all the others, because it's going to tie things together for you. But in Yankee society, going back in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it was common for them to have a constable whose job it was. He was appointed by the communal government. It was his job to look in on every dozen or so families that were assigned to him and to ensure that they were functioning according to government edicts, to community edicts. Remember when a certain politician said it takes a village? In the South, that would mean it takes a family. That means your family's influencing you, your football coach, your teacher, your local pastor, they're influencing you. In Northern terminology, or Yankee terminology, I should say, it means you are following the edicts of your local government. All right, so anybody that did not fall in line with that was eventually determined to be a witch, and they were killed, brought up on trial, imprisoned, or banished from the community. This is how
Thank you for reminding me.
This is how megalomaniacal the Yankee doctrine is in their view of how the world should function. And with post-Lincoln, with Lincoln's destruction and the breakdown and the separation of powers and state control over the general government, he laid the foundation for what became the progressive era, which means the progress of centralization, which Wilson built upon and took us into the modern century. And frankly, post-Wilson and especially post-Roosevelt and World War II and Truman, we've never come out of that mindset in total. We now view these things as patriotic.
Right.
It is the world. It's the tail wagging the dog. We've turned the entire country and the philosophy of our founding fathers upside down. And again, last statement on this, because I know it went long there, but again, your Confederate ancestor went to war to stop this. This is what he interposed his body and his life to prevent: the Leviathan and the craziness and the insanity that we see today.
And that, Carl, is why our Constitution tells us to promote those ideas that he cherished, and the charge that is given to us by Stephen D. Lee is to promote and to vindicate, not apologize, but to vindicate the cause for which they struggle. And that is what I believe.
The SCV Constitution you were talking about.
Well, yeah, the SCV Constitution, all SCV members are dedicated to promote and vindicate the cause for which the Confederate soldier gave his life and his all for.
All right, guys. It's been another 40 minutes. Do y'all want to continue discussing? And if we do, we need to take another break. Or do y'all want to wrap?
I think we need to wrap.
I do too. Cause you got some old men. You know, everybody's not young like you and Carl.
Well, I don't know about me.
We might be
Carl's
pretty.
young.
We might be prettier than y'all, but we're not as young as y'all.
I'm not as young as him.
All right, everybody. Well, I appreciate y'all coming on. We're going to have to get y'all on again. This has been a very, very informative, very good 1 hour and 24 minutes and, 25 minutes going up. We are going to call it here. We are going to return next Monday with our regularly scheduled weekly lineup here on our Facebook page. Tune in 7 o'clock. We'll be having Adam Southern and Matt on for our Hearth and Home episode. That is where we talk about the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs. Don't know what they're going to bring on, but I hope it's a very interesting item. I'm sure it will be. Trying to think of what else we've got coming up. Oh, the book review for this upcoming month is actually a DiLorenzo book on Lincoln. Moose is going to be putting that out there later on this week, or we'll announce it Monday. We're right now giving it a preliminary listen right now on Audible before we fully announce it, but it should be good. So tune in Monday for that. In the words of Harold Philpotts.
Before you close,
yeah,
you just reminded me of something. You just reminded Audible. The South Was Right is now, according to Shotwell Publishing, in an audio version. So if you want to listen to The South Was Right, is now audio.
I saw that. I
Okay,
saw that
good.
it was on there.
Hey, one thing, Connor. Let me say this real quick. I really appreciate y'all having me on. I don't know why in the world you needed me when you got these two guys. I just want to say it was an honor to be on. I love the channel. I love these two guys. They're heroes of mine, and I really appreciate being able to be on here with them.
You fellas are the heroes, not us.
Yeah.
I assure you.
And your standard for heroes is rather low.
But we appreciate it.
No, it's you three boys. I appreciate it. Appreciate y'all coming on. We will do this again next year. Next year, Constitution Day is probably going to be on a Saturday, if I had to guess, because the 18th was a Saturday this year. So we'll figure it out. But until then, in the words of Harold Philpotts, no Fumar in the elevator and rudder frop.
Thank you.